Good afternoon, students. Today we will be starting a new topic, that is sexual reproduction in plants. Under this topic, we will be covering the following subtopics. And these subtopics are: first, sexual reproduction, its characteristics and its significance. Second, sexual reproduction in flowering plants, under which we will cover following given topics. First, structure of a typical flower, pollination and its types, and fertilization. So let's start our today's session with the first topic. What do you mean by sexual reproduction? Students, when reproduction occurs as a consequence of fusion of two gametes, it is called sexual reproduction. In this mode of reproduction, two sexes, male and female, takes part. Male produces male gamete, which is called as sperm, and female produces female gamete, which is called as ovum or ova. The union or the fusion of these two gametes results in the formation of zygote, and this process is known as fertilization. Now students, you should also know about the process called gametogenesis. Gametogenesis is a process of formation of gametes of both male and female. Students, now moving towards the characteristics of sexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, there is an involvement of two different sexes or two different parents. One should be male and other should be female. In sexual reproduction, gametes are required. And during gamete formation, meiosis type of cell division takes place, resulting in the formation of haploid gametes. Here, haploid means gamete having half number or n number of chromosomes, whereas diploid means gamete having same number, means 2n number of chromosomes as the parent possesses. In sexual reproduction, fertilization process takes place, about which I have explained you earlier, that fertilization is the process of fusion of male and female gamete. Daughter organisms are genetically varied from the parent, means that they show a bit of difference in the genetic material from the parent. In sexual reproduction, multiplication rate is slower than in asexual reproduction. Now coming to the significance or advantage of sexual reproduction. First one is, during sexual reproduction, crossing over takes place. Now what do you mean by crossing over here? Crossing over means swapping or interchanging of genetic fragments or genetic material between two homologous chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes means two chromosomes of a pair which are exactly similar in their shape and size. Crossing over causes genetic recombination, which ultimately leads to variations. Students, by the given picture, you can easily understand how exchange of genetic material occurs between two homologous chromosomes and resulting in variations or recombinants. These variations play an important role in the process of evolution. Now, what is evolution? It is the development of complex organisms from pre-existing simpler organisms through gradual change since the beginning of life. And the second advantage is, as we know, in sexual reproduction, the two haploid sets of chromosomes, one from each parent, one set from the mother and one set from the father, unites to form a new combination of genes, so that each individual of a species can maintain its own identity. So, let's start with sexual reproduction in plants. Students, sexual reproduction occurs mostly in flowering plants. Flowers are the reproductive organ of plants. The reproductive parts of the plant remain inside the flower. And what are these reproductive parts? These are male and female part of the flower, which are carpel and stamen. The flowering plants in which male and female reproductive parts are present in the same flower, they are called bisexual or monoecious flowers. For example, China rose, mustard, etc. Whereas the flowering plant in which single sex organ, either male or female, is present in a flower are called unisexual flower or dioecious flowers. For example, papaya, watermelon, etc. Structure of a typical flower. A flower commonly has 4 parts arranged in rings. These parts in order from the outside are: first one, sepals. Sepals are usually green leafy structures which protect inner parts of flowers. The outermost ring of a flower consists of sepal is called as calyx. Petals. Petals are colored and showy leafy structures which help in attracting pollinating agents. The inner ring of a flower laying inside the sepals is called corolla. Third, stamen. It is the male reproductive part consisting of an anther and a stalk called filament. On the tip of filament, anther is swollen, produces powdery particles called pollen grains, which contains the male gametes in it. Fourth, carpel or pistil. Female reproductive part consisting of a basal swollen portion called ovary. A long neck called style which ends in a knob-like part called stigma. Ovary contains many ovules. Inside each ovule develops a single female gamete called ovum or egg. Students, the process of reproduction and seed formation in plants includes pollination, fertilization and post-fertilization changes. So now coming first to pollination. Pollination is the process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the flower. As you know that the pollen grains are not capable of locomotion or movement, so they have to depend on various agents for their transmission. Such agents are called as pollinating agents, such as wind, water, insects and animals. In the picture, you can see some examples of animal pollinators like bees, birds, butterfly, beetles, etc. The transfer of pollen grains to the stigma can take place in 2 ways. First, within the same flower or between flowers of the same plant. Or second, between flowers from different plants of the same species. Pollination in the first case is called self-pollination, while in the second case it is called cross-pollination. Now coming first to the self-pollination. Self-pollination is the transference of pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma of the same flower or of another flower borne by the same plant. Self-pollination generally occurs in bisexual flowers. Then, cross-pollination. The transference of pollen grains from anther of a flower of one plant to the stigma of a flower of another plant of the same species is called cross-pollination. Cross-pollination occurs both in unisexual and bisexual flowers and results in intermixing of genetic characters of the two parental plants. It also brings about variations in offspring. Next process is fertilization. Pollination is followed by fertilization. It is the process of fusion of male and female gamete and results in the formation of zygote. It is a step between pollination and seed formation. Students, before I start explaining you the process of fertilization, let me brief you about some important terms associated to it with the help of this given picture. First one is pollen grain. It is a microscopic unicellular structure which contains two male gametes at maturity. Second, ovule. It is a small structure contained in the ovary. Next, integuments. Ovule is surrounded by two protective coats called integuments. Fourth, embryo sac. Within the ovule, there is a structure called embryo sac which contains an egg or female gamete. Next, microphyllae. It is an opening present at the base of the ovule. Students, the embryo sac contains an egg or female gamete towards the microphyllae and the two polar nuclei in the center. The embryo sac, in addition to an egg and a secondary nucleus, also contains two synergids and three antipodal cells. Now let's move towards the process of fertilization. Now let me tell you how the process of fertilization takes place in flowering plants step by step. First, after the pollen grains are deposited on the stigma, the pollen grain absorbs water and sugar from the surface of the stigma and swells up. Second, then the pollen grains produces a fine tube called pollen tube, which eventually travels down the whole length of the style to ovary and reaches to microphyllae. Third, the two male gametes through pollen tube enters the ovule and released inside the embryo sac. Fourth, one male gamete fuses with the egg to form zygote, which grows into an embryo and finally into a new plant. Fifth, the other male gamete fuses with the two polar bodies or polar nuclei to form the endosperm, which provides nourishment to the embryo. Students, fertilization process in plants involves two fusions. First one, syngamy. It is the fusion of male and female gamete. Second, triple fusion. The fusion of male gamete with the two polar bodies. Thus, it is called double fertilization. Now moving towards some post-fertilization events. First, after fertilization, the sepals, petals, stamen, style and stigma wither away and usually fall off. Second, the ovary enlarges considerably. Third, inside the ovule, the zygote undergoes cell division to form embryo and ovule develops into seed. The ovary wall develops into the fruit wall and the whole ovary after fertilization is called the fruit. Students, the embryo inside the seed possesses a tiny radicle or root part and a tiny plumule or a shoot part, and cotyledones having stored food for the baby plant. An embryo may have a single cotyledon as in case of monocots or two cotyledones as in dicots. The embryo lies inside the seed in a dormant condition. Dormant means inactive condition for a long time. On getting favorable environmental conditions, it germinates to form a small seedling, which finally grows into a plant. The process of development of seedling from a seed is called germination. Students, I hope you all understood about the sexual reproduction in plants. In the next video, I will be discussing of sexual reproduction in human beings. Have a good day.